Michael Collins, Irish, Míceál Ó Coileáin, October 16, 1890 – August 22, 1922, was an Irish revolutionary, soldier, and politician who was a leading figure in the early 20th century Irish struggle for independence. He was chairman of the Provisional Government of the Irish Free State from January 1922 until his assassination in August 1922. Collins was born in Woodfield, County Cork as the youngest of 8 children. His family had Republican connections stemming back to the 1798 rebellion. He moved to London in 1906, working and studying law at King's College London. He was part of the London GAA and through this became associated with the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Returning to Ireland in 1916, he fought in the Easter Rising. He was imprisoned in the Frongach internment camp as a prisoner of war but released in December 1916. After the Rising, Collins rose through the ranks of the Irish Volunteers and Sinn Féin. He became a Taoiseach Dáil for South Cork in 1918 and was appointed Minister for Finance in the first Dáil. He was present when the Dáil convened on January 21, 1919 and declared the independence of the Irish Republic. In the ensuing War of Independence, he was Director of Organisation and Adjutant General for the Irish Volunteers, and Director of Intelligence of the Irish Republican Army. He gained fame as a guerrilla warfare strategist, planning and directing many successful attacks on British forces, such as the assassination of key British intelligence agents in November 1920. After the ceasefire of July 1921, Collins and Arthur Griffith were sent to London by Eamon de Valera to negotiate the peace terms. The resulting Anglo-Irish Treaty established the Irish Free State but included an oath of allegiance to the Crown, which was a deal-breaker for de Valera and other Republican leaders. Collins saw the treaty as offering Ireland the freedom to achieve freedom. He persuaded a small majority in the Dáil to ratify the treaty and a provisional government was formed under his chairmanship in early 1922. Mutinous activities by anti-treaty figures in June 1922 led to the outbreak of the Irish Civil War, in which Collins was Commander-in-Chief of the National Army. He was shot and killed in an ambush by anti-treaty forces on August 22, 1922. Early years. Born in Woodfield, Hughes Cross, near Clonakilty, County Cork, Collins was his parents' third son and youngest of 8 children. Most biographies give his date of birth as October 16, 1890, but his tombstone cites October 12, 1890. Referred to in a British Secret Service report as Brainy, the Collins family were part of an ancient clan, widely spread over County Cork. They had Republican connections that can be traced back to the 1798 rebellion. The Collins cited their descent from the Eoganachta. For the 20th century, the long-hidden Ó Coileáin clan of Ui Conail Gabitra, once the most dominant September of the Ui Figinti, produced Michael Collins, or Míceál Ó Coileáin. His September were driven out of County Limerick in the 13th century by the Fitzgeralds, and regarded themselves as dispossessed aristocracy. The Ó Coileáins had joined their cousins the O'Donovans in County Cork, who themselves had been assisted by their friends the O'Mahonys. Collins' father, Michael John, 1816–1897, was a farmer by profession. A mathematician in his spare time, he had been a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, IRB, movement. The elder Collins was 60 years old when he married Mary Ann O'Brien, then 23, in 1876. The marriage was apparently happy. They brought up 8 children on a 90-acre, 36-ha, farm called Woodfield, which the Collins had held as tenants for several generations. On his deathbed, Collins' father, who was the 7th son of a 7th son, predicted that his daughter Helena, one of Michael's elder sisters, would become a nun. She later did, taking the name in religion Sister Mary Celestine, and serving in Whitby. He then turned to the family and told them to take care of Michael, because one day he'll be a great man. He'll do great work for Ireland. Michael was 6 years old when his father died. Collins was a bright and precocious child with a fiery temper and a passionate feeling of Irish patriotism. He named a local blacksmith, James Santry, and his headmaster at Lissaveard National School, Dennis Lyons, as the first nationalists to personally inspire his pride of Irishness. Lyons was a member of the IRB, while Santry's family had participated in, and forged arms for, the rebellions of 1798, 1848 and 1867. There are a number of anecdotal explanations for the origin of his nickname the Big Fellow. The most authoritative comes from his family, stating that he was called this as a child. It had been a term of endearment for their youngest brother, who was always keen to take on tasks beyond his years. It was certainly already established by his teens, long before he emerged as a political or military leader. At the age of 13 he attended Clonakilty National School. During the week he stayed with his sister Margaret Collins O'Driscoll and her husband Patrick O'Driscoll, while at weekends he returned to the family farm. Patrick O'Driscoll founded the West Cork People and Collins helped out with general reporting and preparing the issues of the newspaper. Leaving school at 15, Collins took the British Civil Service examination in Cork in February 1906 and moved to the home of his sister Hanny in London, where he became a boy clerk in the Post Office Savings Bank at Blythe House. In 1910 he became a messenger at a London firm of stockbrokers, Horne and Company. While living in London he studied law at King's College London. He joined the London GAA and, through this, the IRB. Sam Maguire, a Republican from Dunmanway, County Cork, introduced the 19-year-old Collins to the IRB. In 1915 he moved to work in the Guarantee Trust Company of New York where he remained until his return to Ireland the following year, joining part-time Craig Gardner & Co., a firm of accountants in Dawson Street, Dublin. Easter Rising. The struggle for Home Rule, along with labor unrest, had led to the formation in 1913 of two major nationalist paramilitary groups who later launched the Easter Rising. The Irish Citizen Army was established by James Connolly and the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, ITGU, to protect strikers from the Dublin Metropolitan Police during the 1913 Dublin lockout. The Irish Volunteers were created in the same year by nationalists in response to the formation of the Ulster Volunteers, UVF, an Ulster loyalist body pledged to oppose Home Rule by force. An organizer of considerable intelligence, Collins had become highly respected in the IRB. This led to his appointment as financial advisor to Count Plunkett, father of one of the Easter Rising's organizers, Joseph Plunkett. Collins took part in preparing arms and drilling troops for the insurrection. The Rising was Collins' first appearance in national events. When it commenced on Easter Monday 1916, Collins served as Joseph Plunkett's aide-de-camp at the rebellion's headquarters in the General Post Office, GPO, in Dublin. There he fought alongside Patrick Pearse, James Connolly, and other members of the Rising leadership. The Rising is generally acknowledged to have been a military disaster, yet the insurgents achieved their goal of holding their positions for the minimum time required to justify a claim to independence under international criteria. Collins was arrested, along with thousands of other participants, following the surrender. Before being transferred to Frongach internment camp in Wales, he was processed through Richmond Barracks. At this location, Collins was identified by a sorting process overseen by British intelligence G-men as someone who should be selected for harsher punishment, including execution. While waiting, he heard his name called out. In an effort to identify the speaker, he moved to the other side of the building, and once there, stayed. This movement placed him in the group selected for lighter punishment and was, as historian Tim Pat Coogan describes, one of the luckiest escapes of his life. Collins first began to emerge as a major figure in the vacuum created by the executions of the 1916 leadership. He began hatching plans for next time even before the prison ships left Dublin. At Fron Gach he was one of the organisers of a programme of protest and non-cooperation with authorities, similar to that later carried on by IRA internees in Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 1980s. The camp proved an excellent opportunity for networking with physical force Republicans from all over the country, of which he became a key organizer. While some celebrated the fact that a rising had happened at all, believing in Pearse's theory of blood sacrifice, namely that the deaths of the rising's leaders would inspire others, Collins railed against the military blunders made, such as the seizure of indefensible and very vulnerable positions like St. Stephen's Green, which were impossible to escape from and difficult to supply. Public outcry placed pressure on the British government to end the internment. In December 1916, the Fron Gach prisoners were sent home. 1917–1918. Before his death, Tom Clark, first signatory of the 1916 proclamation and widely considered the rising's foremost organizer, had designated his wife Kathleen Clark as the official caretaker of rising official business, in the event that the leadership did not survive. By June 1916, Mrs. Clark had sent out the first post-rising communique to the IRB, declaring the rising to be only the beginning and directing nationalists to prepare for the next blow. Soon after his release, Mrs. Clark appointed Collins secretary to the National Aid and Volunteers Dependence Fund, NAVF, and subsequently passed on to him the secret organizational information and contacts which she had held in trust for the independence movement. Collins became one of the leading figures in the post-rising independence movement spearheaded by Arthur Griffith, editor/publisher of the main nationalist newspaper The United Irishman, which Collins had read avidly as a boy. Griffith's organisation Sinn Féin had been founded in 1905 as an umbrella group to unify all the various factions within the nationalist movement. Under Griffith's policy, Collins and other advocates of the physical force approach to independence gained the cooperation of nonviolent Sinn Féin, while agreeing to disagree with Griffith's moderate ideas of a dual monarchy solution based on the Hungarian model. The British government and mainstream Irish media had wrongly blamed Sinn Féin for the rising. This attracted rising participants to join the organisation in order to exploit the reputation with which such British propaganda had imbued the organisation. By October 1917, Collins had risen to become a member of the executive of Sinn Féin and director of organisation for the Irish Volunteers. Eamon de Valera, another veteran of 1916, stood for the presidency of Sinn Féin against Griffith, who stepped aside and supported de Valera's presidency. First Dáil. In the 1918 general election, Sinn Féin swept the polls throughout much of Ireland, with many seats uncontested, and formed an overwhelming parliamentary majority in Ireland. Like many senior Sinn Féin representatives, Collins was elected as an MP, for Cork South, with the right to sit in the House of Commons of the United Kingdom in London. Unlike their rivals in the Irish Parliamentary Party, IPP, Sinn Féin MPs had announced that they would not take their seats in Westminster but instead would set up an Irish Parliament in Dublin. Before the new body's first meeting, Collins, tipped off by his network of spies, warned his colleagues of plans to arrest all its members in overnight raids. De Valera and others ignored the warnings on the argument that, if the arrests happened, they would constitute a propaganda coup. The intelligence proved accurate and de Valera, along with Sinn Féin MPs who followed his advice, were arrested. Collins and others evaded incarceration. The new parliament, called Dáil Éireann, meaning Assembly of Ireland, see First Dáil, met in the Mansion House, Dublin in January 1919. In de Valera's absence, Cathal Brugha was elected Primate Heir, first or Prime Minister but often translated as President of Dáil Éireann. The following April, Collins engineered de Valera's escape from Lincoln Prison in England, after which Brugge was replaced by de Valera. No state gave diplomatic recognition to the 1919 Republic, despite sustained lobbying in Washington by de Valera and prominent Irish Americans and at the Paris Peace Conference. In January 1919 the Dáil ratified the Irish Republican Army's, IRA, claim to be the Army of the Irish Republic. The IRA had begun a military campaign coincidentally on the same day as the Dáil's first sitting with the Sola Hedbeg ambush, and the IRA's respect for the Dáil's authority was highly conditional. The Irish volunteers began to be referred to as the IRA since their internment at Fron Gach. Up until the Civil War, the two terms were used interchangeably. Minister for Finance. In 1919 the already busy Collins received yet another responsibility when de Valera appointed him to the Ariacht Ministry, as Minister for Finance. Most of the ministries existed only on paper or as one or two people working in a room of a private house, given the circumstances of a brutal war in which ministers were liable to be arrested or killed by the Royal Irish Constabulary, British Army, Black and Tans or the auxiliaries at a moment's notice. Despite that, Collins managed to produce a finance ministry that was able to organise a large bond issue in the form of a national loan to fund the new Irish Republic. According to Bat O'Connor, the Dáil loan raised almost £400,000, of which £25,000 was in gold. The loan, which was declared illegal by the British, was lodged in the individual bank accounts of the trustees. The gold was kept under the floor of O'Connor's house until 1922. The Russian Republic, in the midst of its own civil war, ordered Ludwig Martins, the head of the Soviet Bureau in New York City, to acquire a national loan from the Irish Republic through Harry Boland, offering some jewels as collateral. The jewels remained in a Dublin safe, forgotten by all sides, until the 1930s, when they were found by chance. War of Independence. The Irish War of Independence in effect began on the day that the first Dáil convened, January 21, 1919. On that date, an ambush party of IRA volunteers from the 3rd Tipperary Brigade including Seamus Robinson, Dan Breen, Sean Treacy and Sean Hogan, attacked a pair of Royal Irish Constabulary, RIC, men who were escorting a consignment of gelignite to a quarry in Sola Hedbeg, County Tipperary. The two policemen were shot dead during the engagement. This ambush is considered the first action in the Irish War of Independence. The engagement had no advance authorization from the nascent government. However, Collins and Dáil discussion of the incident implicitly accepted responsibility on behalf of the IRB. The legislature's support for the armed struggle soon after became official. From that time Collins filled a number of roles in addition to his legislative duties. That summer he was elected president of the IRB, and therefore, in the doctrine of that organization, de jure president of the Irish Republic. In September, he was made Director of Intelligence for the Irish Republican Army, which now had a mandate to pursue an armed campaign, as the official military of the Irish nation. With Cathal Brugge as Minister of Defence, Collins became Director of Organisation and Adjutant General of the Volunteers. Collins had spent much of this period helping to organize the volunteers as an effective military force, concentrating particularly on driving the RIC out of isolated barracks and seizing their weapons. In the early 20th century this permanently armed police force was, in effect, the principal representation of the British state in large parts of rural Munster and Connaught, and with their withdrawal, Republicans felt able to establish their own institutions. In turn, though, the retreat of the RIC drove the British towards more radical and violent responses, simultaneously alienating already weak support for British rule in the populace but also increasing the military pressure on the volunteers. Collins was determined to avoid the massive destruction, military and civilian losses for merely symbolic victories that had characterized the 1916 Rising. Instead he directed a guerrilla war against the British, suddenly attacking then just as quickly withdrawing, minimizing losses and maximizing effectiveness. As the war began in earnest, de Valera traveled to the United States for an extended speaking tour to raise funds for the outlawed Republican government. It was in publicity for this tour that de Valera, who had been elected primate heir by the Dáil, was first referred to as president. While financially successful, grave political conflicts followed in de Valera's wake there which threatened the unity of Irish American support for the rebels. Some members of the IRB also objected to the use of the presidential title because their organization's constitution had a different definition of that title. Back in Ireland, Collins arranged the national loan, organized the IRA, effectively led the government, and managed arms smuggling operations. Local guerrilla units received supplies, training, and had largely a free hand to develop the war in their own region. These were the Flying Columns who comprised the bulk of the War of Independence rank and file in the Southwest. Collins, Dick McKee, and regional commanders such as Dan Breen and Tom Barry oversaw tactics and general strategy. There were also regional organizers, such as Ernie O'Malley and Liam Mellows, who reported directly to Collins at St. Eda's secret basement GHQ in central Dublin. They were supported by a vast intelligence network of men and women in all walks of life that reached deep into the British administration in Ireland. It was at this time that Collins created a special assassination unit called the Squad expressly to kill British agents and informers. Collins was criticized for these tactics but cited the universal wartime practice of executing enemy spies who were, in his words, hunting victims for execution. Campaigning for Irish independence, even non-violently, was still targeted both by prosecutions under British law entailing the death penalty and also by extrajudicial killings such as that of Thomas MacCurtain, nationalist mayor of Cork City. In 1920 the British offered a bounty of £10,000, equivalent to GB pound 300,000/360,000 euros in 2010, for information leading to Collins' capture or death. He and the national forces continued to evade capture and carried out strikes against British forces, frequently operating out of safe houses in the vicinity of government buildings, such as Vaughan's and Instad. The Crown responded with escalation of the war, with the importation of special forces such as the Auxiliaries, the Black and Tans, the Cairo Gang, and others. Officially or unofficially, many of these groups were given a free hand to institute a reign of terror, shooting Irish people indiscriminately, invading homes, looting and burning. In 1920, following Westminster's prominent announcements that it had the Irish insurgents on the run, Collins and his squad killed several British Secret Service agents in a series of coordinated raids. In retaliation, members of the Royal Irish Constabulary went to Croke Park, where a GAA football match was taking place between Dublin and Tipperary. The police officers opened fire on the crowd, killing 12 and wounding 60. This event became known as Bloody Sunday. A stampede of panicking British operatives sought the shelter of Dublin Castle next day. About the same time, Tom Barry's 3rd Cork Brigade took no prisoners in a bitter battle with British forces at Kilmacle. In many regions, the RIC and other Crown forces became all but confined to the strongest barracks in the larger towns as rural areas came increasingly under rebel control. These Republican victories would have been impossible without widespread support from the Irish population, which included every level of society and reached deep into the British administration in Ireland. This pattern of guerrilla success against sophisticated imperialist powers was repeated around the world in the early 20th century. At the time of the ceasefire in July 1921, a major operation was allegedly in planning to execute every British Secret Service agent in Dublin, while a major ambush involving 80 officers and men was also planned for Templeglantine, County Limerick. Truce. In 1921, General Macready, commander of British forces in Ireland, reported to his government that the Empire's only hope of holding Ireland was by martial law, including the suspension of all normal life. Political considerations regarding Westminster's global foreign policy ruled out this option. Irish-American public opinion was important to U.S. support for British agendas in Asia. Closer to home, Britain's efforts at a military solution had already spawned a powerful peace movement, demanding an end to the slaughter in Ireland. Prominent voices calling for negotiations included the Labour Party, the London Times and other leading periodicals, members of the House of Lords, English Catholics, and famous authors such as George Bernard Shaw. Still, it was not the British government which initiated negotiations. Individual English activists, including clergy, made private overtures which reached Arthur Griffith. Griffith expressed his welcome for dialogue. The British MP Brigadier General Cockerill sent an open letter to Prime Minister Lloyd George that was printed in the Times, outlining how a peace conference with the Irish should be organised. The Pope made an urgent public appeal for a negotiated end to the violence. Whether or not Lloyd George welcomed such advisers, he could no longer hold out against this tide. In July, Lloyd George's government offered a truce. Arrangements were made for a conference between British government and the leaders of the yet unrecognised Republic. There remains uncertainty as to the two sides' capability to have carried on the conflict much longer. Collins told Hamar Greenwood after signing the Anglo-Irish Treaty, "You had us dead beat. We could not have lasted another 3 weeks. When we were told of the offer of a truce we were astonished. We thought you must have gone mad." However, he stated on the record that there will be no compromise and no negotiations with any British government until Ireland is recognised as an independent republic. The same effort that would get us Dominion Home Rule will get us a republic. At no time had the Dáil or the IRA asked for a conference or a truce. However, the Dáil as a whole was less uncompromising. It decided to proceed to a peace conference, although it was ascertained in the preliminary stages that a fully independent republic would not be on the table and that the loss of some northeastern counties was a foregone conclusion. Many of the rebel forces on the ground first heard of the truce when it was announced in the newspapers, and this gave rise to the first fissures in nationalist unity, which had serious consequences later on. They felt they had not been included in consultations regarding its terms. De Valera was widely acknowledged as the most skillful negotiator on the Dáil government side, and he participated in the initial parleys, agreeing the basis on which talks could begin. The first meetings were held in strict secrecy soon after the Customs House battle, with Andrew Cope representing Dublin Castle's British authorities. Later, de Valera travelled to London for the first official contact with Lloyd George. The two met one-on-one in a private meeting, the proceedings of which have never been revealed. During this truce period, de Valera sued for official designation as President of the Irish Republic and obtained it from the Dáil in August 1921. Not long after, the Cabinet was obliged to select the delegation that would travel to the London Peace Conference and negotiate a treaty. In an extraordinary departure from his usual role, de Valera adamantly declined to attend, insisting instead that Collins should take his place there, along with Arthur Griffith. Collins strenuously resisted this appointment, protesting that he was a soldier, not a politician, and that his exposure to the London authorities would reduce his effectiveness as a guerrilla leader should hostilities resume. He had kept his public visibility to a minimum during the conduct of the war. Up to this time the British still had very few reliable photographs of him. The Cabinet of Seven split on the issue, with de Valera casting the deciding vote. Many of Collins's associates warned him not to go, that he was being set up as a political scapegoat. Following intense soul-searching and all-night consultations with his most trusted advisers, he resolved to attend in the spirit of a soldier obeying orders. In private correspondence he foresaw the catastrophe ahead: "Let them make a scapegoat or whatever they like of me. Someone must go." Anglo-Irish Treaty. The Irish delegates to London were, upon de Valera's insistence, designated as plenipotentiaries, meaning that they had full authority to sign an agreement on behalf of the Dáil government. The treaty would then be subject to approval by a vote of the full Dáil. The majority of the Irish treaty delegates, including Arthur Griffith, leader, Robert Barton, and Eamon Duggan, with Robert Erskine Childers as Secretary-General to the delegation, set up headquarters at 22 Hans Place in Knightsbridge on October 11, 1921 and resided there until conclusion of the negotiations in December. Collins shared quarters at 15 Cadogan Gardens with the delegation's publicity department, Secretary Diarmuid O'Hegarty, Joseph McGrath, as well as substantial intelligence and bodyguard personnel including Liam Tobin, Tom Cullen, Ned Broy, Emmett Dalton, and Joseph Dolan of the squad. The British side was represented by PM Lloyd George, Colonial Secretary Winston Churchill and F.E. Smith, among others. 2 months of arduous wrangling ensued. The Irish delegation made frequent crossings back to Dublin to make progress reports and confer with their Dáil colleagues. However, Collins in his correspondence and subsequent Dáil debates expressed the delegates' frustration at being unable to obtain clear instructions as to whether or not they should accept the terms on offer and sign the treaty. In November, with the London peace talks still in progress, Collins attended a large meeting of regional IRA commanders at Parnell Place in Dublin. In a private conference he informed Liam Deasy, Florence O'Donoghue, and Liam Lynch that there would have to be some compromise in the current negotiations in London. There was no question of our getting all the demands we were making. He was advised by Lynch not to bring this out in the full assembly. Reviewing subsequent events, Deasy later doubted the wisdom of that advice. The negotiations ultimately resulted in the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which was signed on December 6, 1921. The agreement provided for a Dominion status Irish Free State, whose relationship to the British Commonwealth would be modelled after Canada's. This was a compromise, halfway between an independent republic and a province of the Empire. The settlement essentially vacated the Treaty of Limerick of 1688 and overturned the Act of Union by recognising the native Irish legislature's independence. Under a bicameral parliament, executive authority would remain vested in the king but exercised by an Irish government elected by Dáil Éireann as a lower house. British forces would depart the Free State forthwith and be replaced by an Irish army. Along with an independent courts system, the treaty granted a level of internal independence that far exceeded any home rule which had been sought by Charles Stewart Parnell or by his Irish Parliamentary Party successors John Redmond and John Dillon. It was agreed that counties with a large Unionist population, concentrated in a relatively small area in eastern Ulster, would have a chance to opt out of the Free State and remain under the Crown. An Irish Boundary Commission was to be established to draw a border, which ultimately came to encompass a 6-county region. Inclusion in the Free State was to be subject to a vote of the majority population in each county. Collins anticipated no more than 4 counties would join the northeastern statelet, making it economically non-viable, and that this would facilitate the reunification of all 32 counties in the foreseeable future. While it fell short of the republic that he had fought to create, Collins concluded that the treaty offered Ireland the freedom to achieve freedom. It essentially offered a chance to remove the gun from Irish politics and to seek further independence through a native government and legislature. Nonetheless, he knew that elements of the treaty would cause controversy in Ireland. Upon signing the treaty, F.E. Smith remarked, "I may have signed my political death warrant tonight." Collins replied, "I may have signed my actual death warrant." Treaty debates. This remark encapsulated his acknowledgement that the treaty was a compromise that would be vulnerable to charges of.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.